Welcome to the show where we break down the mental health stigma, navigate sobriety with humor, and prove that it's okay to laugh while you heal. Let's get real, let's get honest, and maybe a little weird. Growth is messy, but you don't have to do it alone. This is Sober Psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is episode 13 of Sober Psychology. I am your host, Michael. Today we're going to dive into fear. Yeah. I figured it was appropriate being episode 13, and depending on whether or not you're a glass half empty or a glass half full kind of person, fear is good or bad, however you want to look at it. But as you remember from the last episode, if you watched that one, we talked about emotional regulation, and we talked about how our emotions operate and how we operate with the emotions, and how emotions aren't bad. It's our response to the emotions that are bad. But since we went through the emotional regulation piece of that, I'm going to start slowly but surely diving into all different types of emotions. But the first one I wanted to start out with is one that I think really takes hold of everything if you think about it, but it's fear. So we're going to jump right in. As always, if you have disagreements, if you don't like what I'm saying, if you agree with me, if you want to talk more in depth about it, we try and keep these episodes at 40 minutes a pop, and we can go longer for sure, but I'd be more than willing to have an in-depth conversation with you about it, psychological breakdown, whatever it is. But fear is a universal human emotion. That means everybody has it. Everybody has some level of fear. And it's weird when you dig into it, because obviously fear of like public speaking or fear of heights or fear can stem from watching horror movies or listening to horror stories. But what we don't pay attention to is that fear can also come from excitement. There's a level of excitement that we get because some people respond to fear differently than others in certain situations, right? And we're going to dive more into that a little bit later. But fear is important. It's very important. It still is an emotion that responds just like we talked about in the last episode, where we have the amygdala, which is like the alarm system telling us what the emotion is, that we have this emotion. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the mature version of the people that wrestle, or the versions that wrestle with the emotions. The prefrontal cortex thinks through it logically, plans ahead, whatever it may be. So fear is important. Understand that. We're not sitting here trying to dog on fear and make it seem like it's not a relevant emotion. It is very relevant, and it's very important. Again, we're going to dive into that a little bit more, but we're going to talk about what fear is. We're going to talk about why we feel fear. We're going to talk about the types of fear, and then we're going to get into what happens when fear becomes a problem, and then some key takeaways, ways to manage it, ways to work through it. All right. So jumping right in, what is fear? Fear is a basic emotional response to a perceived threat or danger. So here's some points to take away from that. Fear is a basic emotional response. So at our core of who we are as human beings, our makeup, biologically, psychologically, physiologically, fear is rooted within that. Okay, so again, it's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with fear, but it's a response to a perceived threat or danger. Okay, so again, you can go back and imagine, your ancestors and what they were dealing with, and all of the trials and tribulations that the human race has had to experience over the course of its existence. And you're gonna realize that fear got them out of a lot of good situations, also put them in bad situations, but fear is the response mechanism, letting me know something bad is happening, or it's about to happen. I need to prepare myself. It's our body's way of saying that something isn't right, let's do something about it. So it's just an emotion, it's a response, just like we talked about last episode. All emotions are, our body's feedback system. It's the GPS navigational points that tell us where to go, what to do, how to handle it, what route to take, whatever. So this reaction is going to trigger fight or flight. You've heard about it a ton. I think it's used a lot, and it's kind of like a joke kind of thing. It's almost like when you match with a girl on a dating app and they tell you that they're like an empath. Like, shut up. Anyways, the same way that we use fight or flight. We use it to justify. I do this all the time. I use it to justify reacting too quickly, if you will. So I'm not regulating my emotion very well, but fear is just like any other emotion. It's a reaction that's going to trigger your fight or flight mechanism. And that's going to lead to the physiological changes. Again, we talked about last episode, but it's going to be, like increased heart rate and adrenaline, sweating, anything that gets your blood really pumping. That's what fear does. That's why a lot of us like to watch scary movies. We like that, knowing that we're in our home and that we're safe, but still it gives us that rush, right? So fear prepares us to either confront the danger or to make a smooth and swift exit. Get me out of there. And you fall on either one of those, and it depends on the situation, right? Not everybody who is, let's say, passive or avoids confrontation or things like that, not everybody is going to just avoid every situation where fear comes up. Everybody's a little bit different, like my wife is very much a flight person, and I'm very much a fight person when it comes to intense moments of emotion. But still, there are moments where she'll stand and fight in an emotional response, and I'll flee. So everybody is just completely different in this, right? So why do we feel fear? There are two sides of fear that we'll talk about. The first one is the biochemical reaction, and then the second one is going to be the emotional response. So the biochemical reaction, that's going to be the automatic physical reactions that you're going to have, which again, sweating, increased heart rate, the adrenaline starts rushing, you start trembling maybe a little bit from that adrenaline rush, you're sweating. I think I already said that, whatever it is, but that's your body's built-in alarm system. That's the biochemical side of it. Then you have the emotional side of fear, and this is where some people might feel exhilarated by like an activity like skydiving. There are some people who are like those Red Bull athletes that are just gung-ho about it. Let's go skydiving. Then there are some people who won't get in an elevator because it goes 2 to 3 floors up, like that fear of heights. So you're going to have your people who are all for it. It's going to create this exhilarating rush, right? Like, I'm ready, let's do this, adrenaline junkies. And then you have the other people that just the thought of something like that is going to send them into orbit. So again, this is what I was talking about at the beginning. Sometimes excitement, most times excitement is somehow or another rooted and stemmed from fear, right? And so again, for more of the emotional side of it, our individual experiences, memories, and cultural backgrounds are going to play a role in the way that we're going to perceive and react to fear. A lot of what we go through in life shapes us, changes us, molds us. I'll go a little bit deeper into this here in a second, but if you see like a parent who is scared and terrified of spiders, and you're a young and impressionable kid, you may adopt that fear of spiders, not because you're actually scared of spiders, but because you learned that that's a normal response to what a spider is, right? And so this is a typical way that a lot of people are brought up. Again, that's the individual experiences, memories, even the cultural backgrounds can do a lot of our emotional responses to fear. But fear, again, is an essential survival mechanism. If you can imagine cavemen, very, very old school, having nothing but spears and rocks and whatnot to throw at things, and there are also saber-toothed tigers running around. Like, the fear is going to let those people know that I should probably avoid this situation, or I need to be very careful about this. I know as a hunter, hunters do this all the time. Like, if you're in a spot where you're hunting, but there are also mountain lions, chances are there's going to be some fear response that's going to let you know, like, I need to be very, very careful in this area because I just don't want to be attacked by a mountain lion. I don't know, you may be different, whatever. But fear it helps us react to potentially life-threatening situations. So it's a good thing. It puts us in a good situation. Like, think about driving on the road and you're avoiding a speeding car. If a car's coming right at you, there's a fear response that's going to kick in, that fight or flight. It's going to tell you to avoid it or not. Okay. And then without fear, again, our ancestors just might not have been able to survive. We might not be. It could change the whole course of history. If you remove fear from the human being, we aren't here anymore. That's just the way that's going to be. So now let's get into types of fear. So this one, we're going to dive a lot deeper into this because, again, this is not only about the psychology of things, but it's about the sobriety aspect of life as well. So fear it's not just physical, but it's also abstract. And it also has to deal with future concerns. And we do this a lot. I do this all the time. But public speaking, financial worries. I'm 35 years old and I play on men's slow pitch softball team. I'm in a league and I still get nervous before every game. I don't know why. I've been playing sports since I was 4 years old. And so it's just this weird response to in rehab, we used to call it future tripping, right? And so you're future tripping, you're tripping out over the future, over things that haven't even happened yet, but you're working up this fear in your mind over something that you don't even know if it's going to happen that way or not. And while all of this is not life-threatening, it still triggers that fight or flight in you, right? And so breaking it down more, there are two types of fear, which are going to be the innate fear. That's your body's natural response system. We just are ingrained with that in general. And then you're going to have the learned fear. Again, going back to like the adult or the parent or somebody that you're watching that's older that's seeing a spider and freaking out about it. You're going to learn that level of fear. Or you could have experienced something that you weren't scared of, you weren't fearful of, and it turned out very poorly, and then you developed a fear from that. But two types of fear, innate and learned. And so many of our fears are acquired through experiences or observing others. That's the two ways that fear is really going to start to develop in you from a young age. But even thinking about this from the psychological side of it, again, we used the example of family members, but like, let's think about the media nowadays. We have so many negative avenues and ways to be able to see the media, and it scares you. Fear mongering from, marketing and advertising. They've been doing that for decades and decades to get you to buy a product, whatever polarizing issue you could think of. I mean, turn on the news and you get scared of something. You think about the period of time in American history, like the Cold War. We were fully convinced that we were going to be attacked by the Russians. And so then all of a sudden people have this fear of Russians and the fear of spies and the fear, of the Soviets. So that's another one that gets developed based on what you're paying attention to. Horror movies, scary stories, things like that. We had this old high school right outside of my hometown, and people swore up and down that there was this girl, this little ghost that would sit in the hallway at night. And, of course, old school, long hallways, lights are shut off. There's like always one or two lights that are still on inside the building, and you can see the silhouette of what looked like a girl curled up. And when you go and you have to get around the corner to stare down that hallway. But when you're staring at down that hallway, you're already worked up. Your mind is in this state of like, I'm about to see something. This is terrifying. And you see a little girl, but it's really a statue of a lion. And it blows my mind. That's how it works. I grew up in Louisiana. You go down south and there are haunted houses everywhere. As a matter of fact, from a real estate perspective, a house sells for more if it's deemed haunted. A good realtor will go and have someone come and declare the home haunted because these homes were built in 1700s, 1800s, and they're still standing. People still use them. There's always some story with them and whatnot, but that house will sell for more if it is officially deemed to be haunted. But we see, and our brain is so powerful that it will make up this fear. We will manifest it into something. Whether or not it's the actual thing, we're going to see something. We're going to hear something. When you're alone at night and you watched a scary movie, you got through, that pint of ice cream and you sat down and snuggled up and whatnot. And as soon as that movie ends, everything gets quiet. It's dark in that house. Everything is creaking and everything is making noises. You're convinced that it's a ghost. You're convinced that it's something that your brain has already worked up for you. So this is where we're going to have that, wherever you're going to categorize that, whether that's the innate fear or the learned fear. But this also applies to social situations. And this is a big one. This is the part that I really want to dive into, because I didn't realize how much fear I had in my life until I had, again, got to rehab and had a reset and had people pointing out things to me and the way that I was operating. But a lot of my social situations, I let fear control every aspect of my life. So I have a fear of abandonment. It's one of my big ones. So I would get into a relationship or a friendship, have an acquaintance, whatever it is. And slowly but surely in my mind, I'd convince myself they're going to leave me. They're going to abandon me. They're going to eventually just figure out that I'm not good enough. And then they're going to go. So because I had that fear, then all of a sudden, every one of my actions was acting as if that fear was going to come true. So then I start acting like someone's going to abandon me. Well, I start distancing myself. I start pushing them away. I start assuming all of these things that are incorrect. And maybe they are correct. I don't know. But the reality is that I'm acting in a way as if that fear is going to happen. I'm future tripping. I'm planning for what I think is the inevitable when it may not even happen. But lo and behold, every single time, what I end up doing in that situation is pushing people away. It's the same thing with, let's say, like a job interview. You can prepare, you can get yourself ready, you can be rocking and rolling, you could walk in there and be the number one prime candidate because you know in your heart of hearts that you planned and you prepared. But if you have this overwhelming fear of failure, and you know that you're going to bomb the interview and you're going to say the wrong things and you're going to do the wrong things, sure enough, you're going to get into that interview and you're going to fail. It's the way it works out because you've already put yourself into that bracket, right? It's kind of a weak scenario here or a weak example, but it's like cattle, right? Like when you're training cattle, you have to train them to go into the corral to be able to feed them, right? You're trying to get them into a spot, or if you're trying to brand them, you want to get them into the chute. You want to keep on working them into the spot. And you slowly but surely train them and train them and train them. But once they're in there, they're in there. They're not going in reverse. Cows don't go into reverse very well. They do one thing and it's just charged straight forward. And so that's kind of how we are with our fear. Like we just convince ourselves that we have to go this way. Like this is going to happen. I know this person hates me. I know this person doesn't want anything to do with me. They're just pretending to like me. They're going to leave me eventually because my mom left me, my dad left me, whatever the excuse is. So we put ourselves into, and we don't go into reverse. It's just, here we are. Now I have lived every day, every breath, every moment, as if that fear was going to manifest itself into reality. And because we live in that, it ends up manifesting itself. We had the acronym for fear. It's called, false evidence appearing real. And you will convince yourself enough in this fear that someone is going to wrong you. Something bad is going to happen. You have created this false evidence and you have now convinced because your brain is super powerful and it's looking to protect you. And because of your response mechanism, which is the fight or flight, whenever the fear hits, you now have the false evidence that you created that your brain is now going to continue to compound upon, and then it's going to appear real. And then you live your life as if that's going to happen. So that's the psychological side of it. And that's a very dangerous spot for us to be in. We do this a lot with everything. I still struggle with it all the time, but and a lot of it too is attached to ego, sure. But like you go into a situation and you automatically have defeated yourself because you think you're not good enough. You think that you're not worthy, whatever it is. You create this fear of telling you it's not going to pan out. And then what ends up happening, there you go. If I have a fear of failure and I already know, I've convinced myself because of that I'm just going to fail, what's the point? Well, of course you're going to fail. If I have a fear of abandonment, I'm going to get into a relationship and I'm going to act as if that person's going to leave me. And then sure enough, they're going to eventually leave you because nobody wants to be around that. Nobody can handle that. And they shouldn't have to. You shouldn't either. But I'm just saying, I don't know the best way to help you with that other than just get over yourself. It's not going to happen, okay? Take the facts. Facts don't care about your feelings, and that's the reality of our situation, especially if you're an addict, alcoholic, recovered. We're still in it. We struggle a lot with just these crazy thoughts all over the place sometimes, just chaos in our minds, and that fear is a constant thing that runs us and drives us. So when fear becomes a problem, we kind of segued into this naturally, but when fear becomes a problem is, while fear is natural and helpful, it can also become very overwhelming and very irrational. When fear becomes extreme, like in social situations or towards certain objects, it's going to indicate a more significant issue. And that's going to be labeled as a phobia or anxiety disorder. And those are real. That's a real thing. You can either already have those established, depends on who you ask, but you can already have those established, or you can work yourself into a phobia, work yourself into an anxiety disorder because of this fear. Those are points where you need to start seeking professional help or some type of support to figure out how you're going to manage and overcome whatever that fear is and your response to it. So, and you can go look this up, and I'm not making light of this to make fun of anybody by any means. There are some people who have a fear of vehicles. And can you imagine living in a place like New York City and just being terrified of vehicles? You can never leave your apartment. You can't ever go into the city. Good luck. That's irrational. And that's one of those where, because it controls every aspect of your life, it inhibits you from being able to live normally. You need to get somebody that's going to help you work through it. Everybody has different theories. We're going to dive in here in a second to how to manage that. But I struggled a lot with fear of failure. I came from a small town. I'm the oldest of my siblings. And in my mind, I had convinced myself that I had to be Superman. I had to be perfect at everything. And a lot of this too, this isn't the episode for it, but a lot of it too is, family will oftentimes put expectations on you, and because they seek their enjoyment through your success, therefore it really just becomes about your parents' success or whoever your mentors are or whatever. But all that to say, I had this outrageous fear of failure. And I struggle a lot with perfectionism, which later on have found out that I have OCD, which is great, and ADHD, which is wonderful. But none of that meant really anything to me at the time. I just knew that I don't like to lose, and I don't like to mess up. I want everything to be perfect. And you can ask my wife, you can ask friends of mine. I'm one of those people where everything has to line up. Everything has to have its space. And if you come into my room and you move it, I know exactly what happened. That's the first thing my brain goes to. If you come in and you move my alarm clock, and this is a real story from high school, you shift my alarm clock 2 inches to the left, I know it. That's the first thing I see. And without even thinking, I just go to fix it. But all that to say, I have a very hard time with fear of failure. And I take it as a reflection of myself. I'm worthless if I fail, all this kind of stuff. And so I will drive myself insane sometimes. I will drive myself to the point where I'm not sleeping at night. I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm obsessing about what I have to do to make it perfect because I live in this fear of failure. And guess what happens more often than not is when I am so worked up that I'm going to fail, I end up failing. It's wild. So to get over that, I've really worked individually on being able to, immersion therapy, if you will. I've worked on facing the fear, and I know that's kind of cliche, but I really just jump into stuff that I'm terrified of. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. I have failed a lot, but by failing, I'm falling forward. And I'm not sitting here saying that if you're scared of heights, go find the highest building and stand on top of it. That's not what I'm saying. You got to work into it. But I am a big believer and a big proponent of the fact that the biggest limitation to the human psyche and humans' abilities are humans. We tell ourselves that we can't, and we're limited because of that, which is surprising to me in a world where we have videos online that you can go look up from 10 years ago of people of accomplishing amazing feats. But I also like to think of the fact that, like, Alexander the Great, dude had one of the biggest empires, the biggest, degree of conquest that the world has ever seen. And I'm sure that dude still had some type of fear. He had some fear somewhere in there. But all that to say, I think it's very important to really just slowly but surely dive into that fear. We recoil and we act like it's gonna just destroy us, when in all actuality, what would help us out the most is proving to ourselves that we can do it. Which leads us into the next segment, which is key takeaways and the tips for managing this. So, acknowledging your fears is going to be the first one. And I'm not trying to say, addicts and alcoholics, it's not like admitting you have a problem, but it kind of is. Like, it's the same thing we talked about with the emotional regulation episode. If you have a fear, if this fear is overwhelming you, you gotta first get to the point where you recognize you're feeling afraid and understand that it's completely normal. That's a big one. Then you need to educate yourself. So sometimes understanding more about what we fear can make it less intimidating. And if you get to that point where you're learning a little bit more about it, it starts to lose its power over time, right? You start to bring in all of that darkness and all that scary into the light, and you realize it's not really that scary. It's not that scary. And then the third step of this is going to be practice relaxation techniques. This goes back to like the mindfulness stuff that we talked about, and we talk about almost every episode, but whatever works for you. Deep breathing. If you look at the last episode, we had a lot of techniques we talked about box breathing, certain techniques like that. We talked about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, just mindfulness techniques. Again, this takes the emotion coming in from the amygdala, which is the alarm blaring like, hey, I have this emotion, to the prefrontal cortex, where you're starting to think through it. Why do I have this emotion? What does this emotion mean? How can I walk my way through this with grace? So that's going to be the next one, is deep breathing, meditation, even a good laugh. Like if you've been on a bender, if you've been binge watching some horror movies, get yourself to a point where you find a comedy. Find something that just makes you laugh and just watch it. Go hang out with friends. I saw a statistic the other day. It said that, and I think this is for men. I don't know if it's true for women. Maybe it's all people, but a phone call where you are communicating with your friend, someone that you trust, for 6 to 8 minutes, it does wonders for your anxiety. Wonders. So find your friend that's going to make you laugh. Find the funny guy and or girl and pick them out and say, okay, look, I'm really worked up about this fear right now. I just need someone to kind of break. So what that's going to do is that's just going to reduce your natural fear response. You're in that fight or flight. When that fear starts kicking in, you're in that fight or flight. You just need someone that's going to kind of like, pop you on the nose or whatever. Just kind of, okay, wake up just a little bit. And then the fourth the last way to do this is going to be the gradual exposure, which is what we just talked about. But it's just facing your fears in small and manageable steps that can help desensitize you over time. I think the majority of us, we work it up so much in our heads. If we would just take a little step, it doesn't have to be a leap. You don't have to start sprinting towards that fear or whatever it is that you're scared of. And get to the point where you're just taking these slow steps, little by little, and then you start to realize it's really not as powerful as you're making it in your brain, right? So again, recapping this, why do we feel fear? It's 100% natural. It's 100% normal to feel fear. Well, I'll say that. Feel fear. 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 There we go. Feel fear. Unique, New York. Where did we go with this? All right, so it's 100% natural to feel fear. It's got two sides of it. You got the biochemical side, which is going to be the adrenaline, the sweats, the shaking, the overall like clamminess, whatnot. Then you're going to have the emotional response to it, which is going to be more of that exhilarating feel if you're an adrenaline junkie, or the person who just the idea of, let's say, jumping out of a plane, skydiving, it's not for me. So you're going to have those real experiences. The types of fear, you're going to have the innate fear, which is what we all are wired to have. We're naturally wired to have some level of fear. And then you're going to have the learned fear. You saw somebody scared of this, or you experienced something, whether it be from a learned experience, whether it be cultural, whatever it is, and you acquired that fear over time. Okay. And then fear becomes a problem when it is more of a phobia or an anxiety disorder. When you're scared of objects, when you're completely locked up and you can't do anything, social situations, you just don't know, that's where it becomes a pretty big deal. And that's where we need to start looking at getting help, finding ways to get support, whatever that looks like, just ways that you can get to manage and overcome that fear. The key takeaways of that are to acknowledge your fear, educate yourself, practice relaxation thoughts, and then gradual exposure. And that's fear. That's fear for you. Fear is not as ridiculous as you may think. Fear is not as intimidating as we work it up to be. Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it can be. If you have a full-blown, fully grown lion roaming outside of your home, and your fear response is, I should probably just stay in this house right now until it's gone, you probably should listen to that fear. That's probably right. But if your fear is telling you that I can't call that person because they hate me and they're going to leave me just like everybody else has, and they're going to betray me, whatever, that may be a little bit irrational. You won't know until you figure it out on your own. You won't know until you go ask those hard questions. So jump into it, right? Don't let that irrational thought, the false evidence appearing real, don't let that manifest itself into that person actually leaving you. You're going to push them away. I promise you. I know for a fact. I got 10 years to prove it, okay? Anyways, fear is normal. It's manageable. It's even exciting sometimes. As always, thank you guys for the love. Feel free to like, to comment, to reach out to me, email, follow socials, share the content. Anything helps. Love you guys. Face your fears. Don't be scared. Bow up. Conquer it. Keep your head up. Keep your heart open. And go help somebody. We'll catch you next time.